right, well, everybody, thank you so much. So I am joining from the Mental Health Coalition handle today for their Project 121 series because everyone needs someone to talk to. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and every day in May, you'll see musicians, actors, influencers getting real and talking about mental health. 31 conversations in 31 days. Now, we all know when I share my story and you share your story, we break down the stigma around mental health. So the person that I wanted to come in on this conversation is a very, very dear friend of mine, my best friend, the one and the only Toree Weaver. Hello, Toree. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm great. How are you?
I'm wonderful, even though you were just a room next to me. I'm glad to hear that you are having a wonderful day. So I brought Toree into this conversation because during this pandemic, Toree moved in with me in January of 2020, and we have been living together since. And if anybody knows how last year was, the pandemic started in March. So we have been side by side through this entire thing. And I think for me personally, and I'm sure Toree can speak to it on her own, but for me personally, last year was one of the most mentally challenging years that I've had in my entire life. I think the pandemic was really, really hard on me, and definitely having Toree's support there really was essential for me to be able to get up every day, to make it happen every day, you know. And I think, and vice versa, I was also able to be there for Toree in getting used to moving to Los Angeles and getting used to what was different about here while being in the midst of a pandemic, and we were able to hold each other accountable at all times to make sure that we were, you know, keeping our head intact. Would you say that?
Yes, I would definitely say that. I mean, there were so many things happening during that time. Like you said, the move was already different for me, coming from a different coast to the West Coast, and then also the pandemic, and then also the spark of Black Lives Matter. There were so many things happening, and for us to be able to lean on each other was so refreshing, and it was so necessary in this time. I know that you and we both felt an obligation to our community to give back and to see what we can do and stand up and protest and do all these things on the front line. But it was also really important to hold each other accountable and look each other in the face and say, hey, I know that you're taking on a lot. I get where you're at. I know where your heart is at, but you also need to take a step back and think about yourself and focus on your mental health so that you can show up and be the best person that you can be. So like you said, holding each other accountable in this time was very crucial. And I'm beyond thankful that we were able to have each other in this unprecedented time.
Amen. You better speak, girl. You better tell it, honey. Now, you know, something that we've definitely been talking about, and you've been there since the very beginning. You've been there way before the food video started. Me and Toree went to college together at Temple University. So we have known each other for many, 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 many years. And one thing that we often talk about is imposter syndrome. You know, and basically, especially how I experienced imposter syndrome. And what was interesting, and I'm really glad that I'm able to tell this story, because I always feel like this part of my story, I guess I always felt shameful to tell the story. So when everything happened and my career took off, even though that was the best year of my life, it was also the worst. And the reason why I say that is because from imposter syndrome, my goal was that I was always going to be a professional actor. Even the week that I moved to LA, I had an audition at Juilliard that I canceled, right? Because I was coming out to LA to start this new career, and it really just was really on my spirit. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, because I felt as though now I was doing food videos, that those food videos didn't necessarily represent who I really was. You know, it was like those happened by accident. And so when all my success started to happen, I started to experience imposter syndrome, to be like, I don't deserve this. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not talented. Why are you giving me all these opportunities? I should not be doing any of this. You know, that's very much how I felt about it. Mm-hmm. And it took a long time for me to start to find, I guess, belief that what was being given, like my blessings, were actually mine, you know? And I don't think we talk about imposter syndrome enough, and especially when you talk about marginalized communities, because a lot of times I felt that also my imposter syndrome was being fueled by people telling me that I wasn't good enough, or telling me that I wasn't going to be able to have a career, or they were always like, enjoy your 15 minutes. You know, I mean, even when I was walking and meeting agencies and stuff like that, they would very much just be in a space of, well, enjoy it now. With me knowing that I was capable of making a stable career, but the fact that other people were basically influencing me, I was allowing my imposter syndrome to be gassed up to where I was living in a constant state of being like, I don't deserve this. I don't want to be here. I'd rather go back to Philadelphia and finish my degree and just live a normal life, you know? And I think it was conversations with you. I know we talked a lot, especially once I moved out to LA, you know, about me starting to own and understand that the food videos were just a stepping stone in a journey to me being able to become who I was meant to be, you know? So when it comes to imposter syndrome, how have you experienced it within your own life?
That's a great question. And I do want to say that we have had this conversation a lot, and I know that's something that you talked about and expressed and been through. On the opposite side of somebody who's not, you know, in the spotlight and the fame, there is a level of imposter syndrome that you still face in your day-to-day life. And just to start off, first of all, your imposter syndrome doesn't need any help. So it's always worse when it's amplified by outside voices, because our inside voice is already the meanest person that we know. The relationship that we have with ourselves is usually a friendship or a relationship that we would not tolerate from anyone else, but we tolerate and we accept it with ourselves. And so when we walk through our day-to-day life, when you go through college and you graduate, or you go through these things and you're in the job industry, you're already doubting yourself. You're already like, okay, what is my role even here? Especially as being a Black woman, when we're experiencing for the first time in 2021, where this is the first Black person to do this is the first Black woman to do that. You already feel like, if I'm the first person in this space, or if I am following the legacy of the first Black person in this space, I have to be excellent. There is no room for any mistakes. There's no room for me to slip up, because I have such a responsibility on my back. And when you already have that pressure on yourself, your inner self starts to say, well, you don't need to be here anyway. You don't need to, you don't deserve to be here. Who are you to follow that person's legacy? Who are you to be the first? You know, we have these amazing people who have broken down all these doors, and sometimes we don't see that excellence in ourselves that we see in other people. And then when we're going out into these workspaces and we don't necessarily see people that look like us, but we're also living to their standards of what we should be, paired with our own standards, it can be a mess. I mean, like when I walked into the workforce, I've been told just straight up, just for how I look, that I wouldn't be able to get in a certain opportunity because of the way my hair was, or because I was a woman, or because however I was dressed that day, to depending on how they were feeling, I didn't fit the bill. And it's like, well, those aren't things that I can change. I can't change the color of my skin. I can't change that I'm a woman. And all those things, like you said, are just fueling the relationship that I have with myself. And that can really send you in a negative, dark path if you're not able to kind of talk with yourself a little bit more gently and kindly.
Absolutely. And I think race plays a big part in imposter syndrome. I mean, someone else that often talks about imposter syndrome is Viola Davis. Yes. You know, and I know Viola Davis has said many times that people always say that she's the Black Meryl Streep. And then her response is, well, why don't you pay me that then? And that's very true. You know, I think about it when it comes to my place in the industry, there have been times where I have watched, you know, my white peers within digital content be given this celebrity treatment of fame and fortune and all these things. And I understand that I have privilege with my proximity to whiteness and where I work, to know that I also have a lot more access to the resources that I have. But I think it's always been a little sad to see how so many Black and especially queer artists are left behind because they don't have such a strong following as, you know, as our white peers. But when you think about resources and accessibility within you know, African American communities and low income communities, you know, places that we come from, they don't even have the accessibility to watch our content. And so when you think about how race plays into it and how classism plays into it and all that, yes, there is a difference, you know? And I think I had to understand that a lot of times when people didn't like my content or that were in my comments, it wasn't always that because I was making bad comments, or I mean, it wasn't making that I was making bad content, or it really would boil down to the fact of being like, oh, but they just don't like me because of my race. you know, and having to understand how that plays a role in imposter syndrome, especially as African American people, when we are always told that we have to work twice as hard to get half of what anybody gets. You know, I know people always ask me, they're always like, well, how are you so humble? And I always say, because I understand that this can be taken away from me at any moment because of the color of my skin. Because no matter what, I remember just a couple of weeks ago, we did a reaction video to the popcorn salad, right? And I remember people were DMing me. They were like, oh my gosh, you're on CNN. You're on CNN. Oh, you've made it now. And in my head, I thinking, what do you mean I'm on CNN? I made it. I literally hosted the Ellen DeGeneres show last week. And it feels like you always have to keep doing more and more and more. And it's like never enough for people to be like, oh, great, you're doing great, you're successful. It feels like, nope, I got to get back in there and keep on doing it. I got to keep on working. I got to keep on accomplishing. And that only adds to your imposter syndrome, because your imposter syndrome then comes into your mind to say, you aren't doing enough. You know, you aren't successful enough. You aren't giving back enough. I remember when I first started, probably 2 weeks in, everybody's like, well, now it's time to give back. How do you want me to give back and I don't even have anything yet? You know? But it trickles down to the minor microaggressions that are targeted towards us, because, and I think this also comes from slavery, is that Black people are expected to work all the time, you know? And that's something we definitely had a conversation about during the pandemic, was being in a space of being like, oh, well, I don't want to work so much anymore, you know? Especially when I looked up at my taxes and looked back at my life to see that all my money and everything that I was doing was work. You know, I wasn't taking vacations. I wasn't enjoying the fruits of my labor. All my money was going to people that worked for me. And I was like, what is the purpose of working if I never get to enjoy it? You know, and I hope that we can figure out some answers or some solutions to imposter syndrome, so that it does not start to affect our day-to-day and our productivity, you know, to be able to manage and to work smarter and not harder, you know?
Yes, because that's all that we know. That's all that we know, especially like you said, speaking from the Black community. I know plenty of times when we always feel like, who am I to complain? Who am I to have a rough day, when everybody who came before me never complained, never took a day off, has fought so hard, never got their foot off the gas, and here I am struggling and I'm having a bad day, and I don't know how to recognize that. I don't know how to understand that I'm worthy enough to take a day off or to prioritize my mental health so that I can keep working. All we know is working hard in the Black community. That's all we know, because that's all we've had to do, is constantly prove ourselves, constantly crack down doors, constantly be on the front lines, constantly giving ourselves, and never realizing how to pour back into ourselves when we're pouring out, and how to face that expectation. Like you said, I can't be the champion of everything all the time, especially when I'm not being the champion for myself.
Amen. Amen. And I honestly say all the time, if you are not happy with yourself, you can't make everybody happy. And I know in this pandemic, and I knew when things had gone too far for me, was when I had my first panic attack. And I was on the bathroom floor being like, this is too much. The world is really starting to weigh on me, you know? And also feeling like, it's crazy to me, and you know this, it's crazy to me how with everything that I've been able to accomplish in just 3 years, I still feel like I haven't done anything. You know, I still feel like, that was cute, but we got to keep working. We got to do more stuff, you know? But with that being said, I want to bring in Dr. Tia Dole now. Tia Dole is a clinical psychologist and oversees all of the Trevor Project's crisis services. And the Trevor Project is the world's largest organization for suicide prevention for LGBTQ plus youth. And I want to bring her in so that we can continue this conversation and get a professional's point of view, because, you know, we just talking, child. So I want to be able to get a professional in here. Now, this is my first time doing a live where we got 3 people on here, so I hope I did that right. Oh, there we go. Hello, Dr. Dole.
I made it. I was waiting for y'all to invite me. I said, oh my goodness, I want to be in this conversation right now.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Now, as you've heard, we've done a lot of talking about imposter syndrome and specifically how it affects those of us that are in marginalized communities. Now, do people in marginalized communities experience imposter syndrome more than others?
Was that a rhetorical question?
See?
Yes, of course. You know, one of the things that really kind of struck me when you were speaking was actually about not just about experiencing it, but kind of how to notice when it's happening. There's one thing that I hear in you is like, oh, I'm aware it's happening. I feel like of less value. I feel the things I'm doing, I'm concerned other people will notice, will see me, will find me out, all those kind of things. Someone will suddenly be like, oh, this person doesn't have talent. This person isn't bringing it. But I also think that a lot of times those thoughts are sort of pre-conscious or unconscious, and they're actually driving your behaviors as well. So just flagging, like, it's not that everybody's like, oh, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome right now. People experience it and don't know. It's not part of their conscious awareness. And I think most people are in that zone where they are like, they're feeling it, they're feeling anxiety, they're feeling distress, and they can't really know, they don't know what's causing it. And so I think that's actually part of the challenge as well. So I think it's really helpful that you're bringing in this conversation, because people might be like, oh, how does one recognize when you're having it?
Right. So how does one, like when it happens, I think that is so hard of being able to be, because I know that I'm a very self-aware person. Like, I know that I am able, and if I'm experiencing something, to be like, oh no, this is that. But how do we provide the tools for people to act against it?
Where I see it mostly comes out in anxiety. And it's funny because when you think about anxiety, it manifests in different ways. And so usually, you know, and this is me sounding like a psychologist caveat, which is like when people are like, well, I don't know if I'm feeling that. And it always starts in the body, right? So you think, I'm feeling anxiety in my chest. Some people feel it in their stomach. They feel a lot of like discomfort, tension in the back. And I think especially when you think about Black folks and the way that we've had to like swallow our anxiety, our natural reactions to trauma, because we don't have time to be, you know, dealing with our negative reactions because we have to get through the day. And so part of it is actually noticing when I'm about to have a meeting with someone and I'm starting to feel anxiety, what's behind it, and engage in what it's called metacognition, thinking about what you're actually thinking about. What are the thoughts that are sort of coming up for me in this moment? I'm about to meet, let's say you're meeting with a producer and you're presenting an idea. I don't know how things work on the back end of entertainment, but let's say you're presenting an idea and you're feeling a lot of anxiety. And so pausing for a moment, I hope you don't mind me going this deep in this conversation, right? Is like, what am I thinking about? What is happening behind the anxiety? Like, and capturing those thoughts. It's really actually challenging to be like, what is the thing? And you're like, okay, I'm feeling anxious. What am I feeling anxious about? What am I thinking? This person, are they going to notice? Are they going to see? Are they going to think my work isn't good enough in comparison to this other producer or this other person, artist that's producing content and things like that? So I think it really is like the first step is to noticing when you start to feel those feelings of anxiety, also sometimes anger. Sometimes when people are feeling anxious, it actually comes out as edgy or rude. And there's a defense mechanism to keep people from seeing the truth about them, that they maybe the truth about them, air quote, that they're not as good as other people.
Amen. Amen to that. Yeah, I think that's very smart to be able to pinpoint the anxiety and knowing that there's something underlying in that area. Something that just made me think about that, especially when you talk about showing who your true self is. Something that I came to a realization recently was that I always felt as though, especially when I would meet people, I always felt like people didn't really know who I was. And at first, I used to think, do I give a different Kalen on TV? Am I pretending? And why do people feel so comfortable, you know? And after I hosted the show, I realized the reason why that was because I was code switching. And because code switching is so ingrained in who I am, I didn't realize that I was doing it. You know, like I would watch me guest host the show and I'd be like, oh, that's a very different persona than online, on my own social media, you know? And so my question to that is, how does code switching play a role in imposter syndrome?
Oh my goodness. I mean, you think about it as I use my white voice. No, I'm joking. It's interesting because I don't know if I don't know if you follow any hip hop artists. Have you heard of like Tobe Nwigwe?
Yes.
He did this like Arrested Killers of Breonna Taylor. And I saw an interview with him recently, and he was like, I'm done code switching. He was like, that's it. I'm always going to be myself, and people are going to feel uncomfortable with it and with my true self, the way that I speak. And then he made this joke like, if you don't speak Ebonics, don't speak to me, which I thought was a really a funny, and because he's like an independent artist. Anyways, you should check him out. I think, code switching is tough because what you can do is lose your sense of self. Which one is me? And especially as Black people who are successful moving in white worlds, there is a world where when you are using your work voice, my children are always like, Mom, stop using your work voice with me. And I'm like, okay, sorry, sorry. Here's mommy voice, right? And so, especially as you get older, you start to switch back and forth, and you can lose yourself in a little bit. And there are worlds where actually both are you. And I do want to step away from this idea that we as Black people, or Black and brown people, really can move in both worlds. We can move in the white world, and we can move in the Black world, right? But other white folks can't necessarily move in the Black world, right? There is, so when you think about it as code switching, which is something that we always do, even when you're thinking about the LGBTQ community, right? You don't necessarily always want to be identified. You may tone it down so that you're not in danger when you're moving through the world. But I do like to frame it is that it's a thing that we do often to make the other feel comfortable with us, right? So we're doing it so that they're not going to think things about us. They're not going to think that we're less educated than them, that they're not going to make assumptions about us. But as soon as we walk in the room, it's already done. So when you started out saying like, well, people didn't seem to know me, that's because people are projecting onto you, projecting an image of what Blackness is, what queer Blackness is. And so in some ways, it doesn't matter who you are behind the mask that they are placing on you. But what matters is that you are not willingly wearing that mask for their comfort.
Now that's a word. Because I know there have been a lot of people that have walked up to me on the streets, and they'll talk to me in AAVE, and it's off-putting because I'm like, why are you talking to me like that, And I don't think I realize it, because definitely I can switch between the two, It's just like I have a way of talking comfortably, within my own house and around my own people to not, necessarily realize that I'm doing it,
Well, and you think about it, you have several worlds, right? You have LGBTQ world, you have Black world, you have your white world, you have your entertainment world, you have all these things. And we, as people of color, marginalized, and I actually like the word minoritized, not minority. We are minoritized by society, is when we learn these skills and we think about it. These are actually awesome skills that we have learned, but they actually crush our spirit over time. And so it really is like, well, how do you figure out how to be your authentic self in a safe way?
Ooh. And that's true. That's true, because I often feel like I have like different personas. Now, Toree, how are you feeling about this?
I'm really taking this all in because, like she said, like, you can't control the mask that people place on you. You just can't. Like, no matter how hard that we try, and I think we're always trying to, like, I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to prove that we don't all do this. I'm going to prove that I'm this. And it's like you're proving this for somebody who isn't trying to be convinced. And so the only person that you're really trying to prove it to is yourself. And why are you trying so hard to prove that to yourself? I feel like is the conversation that we need to start having with ourselves. Why am I defending myself so much to somebody who doesn't care? Or
the question is really whose opinion matters, right? And so, and that's where you start thinking about, Black and brown folks creating content, creating their own, like someone like Issa Rae, creating all content, Black owned, Black employment, Black producers, all those things, because what happens is like, we are in this world and we want to be accepted. We want opportunity. And so the idea is that we have to accept our role, our minstrel role potentially, or however you want to think about it. And how do we stop caring what other people think, but still be successful? Is that a thing that's possible?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. You know, and I think that is very hard. We all wear a lot of different faces, and we act differently depending on the environments that we are in, and the way that we act and the things that we say. And I think also a lot of us are, especially when you work in the entertainment industry, I think a lot of us are code switching to the point where we can control. You know, it's like we're working to a point where we get to call the shots, because once we get to call the shots, then we get to do it our way. But we know that the powers that be, we have to play the game for a little bit. You know, we have to play the game so that we can get to a point that we get to have some type of control and power and get to be our most authentic selves. Yeah.
Well, and I think it is about also freeing ourselves from white supremacy is a challenge. So not to go there, but to go there, I think it really is like taking a beat and figuring out what matters to you. How do you orient your world to your vision rather than someone else's vision? And Kalen, you were saying that you still feel imposter syndrome. And then, if I were your therapist, right, we're not going to go there, but like say, I'd be like, what is the fear? What is behind it? How can you set goals for yourself that aren't oriented about what other people think, but like, what do you want? What is your vision for yourself in 5 years? And how do you get there? Because, you don't get there by being safe.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. You're taking on new clients. Okay, because I'm going to need this.
I would say you got too many patience.
On a weekly basis. Now, when we talk about anxiety as a whole, and we talk about how specifically with you being from the Trevor Project, how it affects LGBTQ plus youth, what are the signs we should be looking out for if we are worried a friend or a family member might be thinking about suicide or experiencing, that heightened sense of emotion?
I think the thing that I always say to people first is look for change behavior. Like something that seems really sort of out of the ordinary. So a young person, for instance, I'm going to keep it in the young person realm. Let's say they withdraw from all their friends, they're kind of staying in their room, or the opposite is they're like really going out, engaging in behaviors that could put them at risk. Please note, I don't use the word risky behaviors that can put them at risk, or their increase of substance use, or their grades really drop. There are a lot of different ways. And one of the things that I do tend to flag to adults, especially when they have young people in their lives, is that a lot of times adults ignore their instincts about their young person. So they'll be like, well, I see something happening, but I'm sure they're fine. They're just an adolescent. Oh, and I think people question themselves because they don't want to overstep or they don't want it to be true that there's something wrong. And so I think when you have a loved one or a close friend and you are seeing something, it's sort of like in the New York City subway. If you see something, say something. There's nothing to be harmed by saying, hey, I'm really seeing this thing in you. Is there something going on? And asking a gentle question that doesn't feel probing, but is oriented around care and not control.
Yeah, that's great. Now, someone from the LGBTQ plus community is watching this right now and is in crisis or just really struggling. What are some resources?
So they can text us.
Which is pinned in the comments.
Pinned on the bottom things. We also have a website where we have like a lot of resources, a coming out guide, supporting your trans folks in your life, things like that. So I really do recommend folks go to like thetrevorproject.org. We have a lot of amazing resources written by our team. And, I would say people can also reach out to us at 24 hours a day.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody so much for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm like, honey, we could be here all day. But lastly, since this is part of the one-to-one series and it's about finding that one person you can have these conversations with, I want us all to answer how someone has shown up for us at a low point and what they did that we really needed in that moment. I can go first. I know definitely that when I had that panic attack and I was on the bathroom floor, I definitely called Toree because Toree was out of town, I believe, at that time. And her really just talking me down off the ledge and giving me words of affirmation really helped to lift my spirit. What about you two?
Oh, I'm also going to share. I know that during the past summer, like I said, with all the Black Lives Matter movement picking up, I was writing a lot of articles around the things that were going on, and a lot of them spoke really heavily to my heart. And Kalen was one of the few ones that actually kind of saw me in the process, saw what I was doing, saw how I was writing these things. And he was the one who had to literally tell me, sister, I'm seeing that this is literally like, I know what you're doing. Your words are beautiful. That's great. But this is literally pulling on your heart. And I need you to take a step back for yourself. And I don't know what would have happened those next following days if he hadn't told me that and had that conversation with me. Because like I said, we do have this obligation to our community to do better and to serve in whatever way that we can. And sometimes we have to take a step back to recharge and take care of ourselves because we are a part of that community as well.
Absolutely.
Since we're staying in the bestie zone, besties, I'm gonna say my bestie, Michelle Richard. She's someone who throughout my life has been just so. She's always calm, and she always listens from a non-judgmental stance. So I could be telling her something so completely wild, and she'll be like, "Okay, tell me how you're feeling about it." So I have someone like the two of you. So it's really wonderful for me to see the two of you supporting each other.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. This has been an absolute wonderful conversation. Make sure that you go onto the Mental Health Coalition's page and watch all the other one-to-one series. Thank you all so much for being here. Today is Thursday. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.